helping you navigate the second half of your life. Today's show is sponsored by Find Houston Senior Care, your one-stop shop for everything senior care and senior living in the greater Houston area. Visit findhoustonseniorcare.com today. And now, here's your host, Kathryn Watson. Good morning and welcome back to the Life After 50 show, where we help you navigate the second half of your life. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart. We're talking about brain health and brain health across your lifespan. I've got with me Dr. Nussbaum, and he will be talking about how to keep your brain health. And that's really important to a lot of our visitors. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you are a board certified geropsychologist and you're a neuropsychologist. And for some of my listeners, they might not know what these terms mean. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, Kathryn, and thanks for having me on, and thanks for all the work that you're doing. It's a great pleasure to be with you here today. So a neuropsychologist is a fancy way of saying that, I'm really fascinated by the miracle that sits between our ears, the human brain. I think it's the single greatest, most magnificent system ever designed. It serves as our identity. And since I was a little boy, I've always been fascinated with human behavior. I think we're a wonderful species to study. We never let ourselves down if we're just interested in kind of watching one another and listening to one another, good, bad, or neutral. And so you put those two things together and you begin to understand that our behavior has a direct relationship to the structure and function of our brain. The geropsychology part, Kathryn, you and I were talking a little bit about, is just the study of late life. It's the study of the older human being, not older human being. And as I was saying to you earlier, I think I'm one of maybe less than 200 or less than 150 board certified geropsychologists in the country. And what that really goes to is that in the United States of America, we still don't pay enough attention to, we don't give enough credibility to the older individual. And that includes the medical system. We don't have enough doctors and care providers to care for this burgeoning, as you know, demographic segment of our society.
I totally agree. And I think most of the people watching this show would agree with you on that. Many of us have cared for aging parents, and we know that there's a lack. There's a lack of understanding about brain health with the regular physicians that our parents were seeing on a day-to-day basis. They don't have the education and they don't have the information that is needed, I think, to help us to live our best life. And that's what we all want to do. We want to live our best life possible.
Yeah, that's so very true. And one of the important messages for everybody is that your brain doesn't know how old it is. Okay, chronological age is made up. We buy into it. We do funny things like we have birthday parties. Lordy, I'm 40, 50 and over. You get a little thing in the mail from AARP. God forbid, 65 and over. All of our policies are based on it. Nobody knows why. It's an interesting thing to think about. But for your viewers, Kathryn, your brain just wants to be stimulated across the lifespan. And some of the healthiest, most productive, most successful, most resilient, most adaptive individuals happen to be older, okay? I've met some teenagers I work with that are having a real struggle, okay? Mm-hmm. So chronological age really isn't the key factor. Just a couple of things. Your brain only weighs 3 pounds. It's composed of 60%. That's a 6 and a 0, everybody. 60% fat. So the next time you're looking at Dr. Nussbaum's tummy and you say he needs to lose a few pounds, it's really the fat in our brain that is the fattest part of our system. And it helps to propel information rapidly. And then listen to this one. Every time your heart beats, 25% of the blood goes right to this 3-pound structure. Now, for the business people on the call today, that's called market share, right? So the epicenter of the world is the human brain. It's very demanding. And that ties into, that's the physiology, Kathryn, that ties into what we can do because of that. What do we eat? How active do we need to be? How social do we need to be to help promote the health of the brain. We don't have any cure for Alzheimer's or dementia. We don't. But we can delay the clinical onset through a healthy lifestyle across the lifespan.
And, that's huge. If you can delay it by 5, maybe 10 years, what a difference that's going to make, because chances are I'm only going to live a certain period of time anyway, right? So maybe I'm going to die at 100. And if you delay it by 10 years, the onset, then I've got 10 years of great living that I'm enjoying. I have met people who have had an Alzheimer's diagnosis, and because they followed some of the things I think you're going to be talking about, because they did these things, they have lived well with that diagnosis for 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, you're so right. You're so right. We know that from research that individuals with higher levels of education, and it's not just sitting in the classroom, it's learning new information. People with occupations where you have to think anew each day, you have to problem solve. Those that stay more socially engaged across the lifespan, should something like Alzheimer's hit the brain, there's a bit of a resilience there. I describe it for the general public as your brain looking like a jungle, okay? That's the goal. Everybody today, you want your brain to look like a jungle. Tell everybody at the dinner table. But think about Alzheimer's as a weed whacker here now. And I'm not trying to be funny, I'm serious.
Oh, okay.
A weed whacker comes in and it begins to take away the brain cells in our brain with Alzheimer's. But in this metaphor, how long would it take you if you had a weed whacker to go into a jungle and show any kind of effect? A long time. Mm-hmm. But my brain doesn't have that jungle. If it's kind of barren with only, say, one tree, the effects of that weed whacker, the effects of the disease are going to come on faster. So that's exactly what you're describing. When you look at individuals who, yes, they have Alzheimer's, but boy, they're sure doing pretty well. I guarantee you that's an individual who has stayed really, really involved, stayed stimulated across their lifespan.
That is interesting. That was an interesting analogy. It really brought it to life. And I think most people can relate to that.
Yeah.
Dr. Nussbaum, you talk about neutral plasticity,
neural
and why it's important for our brain health. Can you tell us a little bit about what is that?
Yeah, no, it's a great. Neuroplasticity is not a new concept. It goes back hundreds of years, but it's reemerged. And everybody on the call may have a child or two, or maybe a grandchild, and maybe you can relate. I know when my wife and I, we have 3 boys. And, Kathryn, they made us read a book when my wife got pregnant. That book was written by a guy named Spock. Y'all remember that? Okay. And Spock told us about the critical period of brain development. Now, everybody on the call, think in your own mind, what was the critical period of brain development? And you're going to say it was about 0 to 3, 0 to 5 years. Y'all remember that? That wasn't that long ago. Okay. My oldest son is 30. It wasn't that long ago. That's what we used to think about the brain. We used to think that you come out of mom's womb and you have about 3 years to kind of emerge and develop, and the brain will develop as best it can be. I don't know what happens at the age of 4 on, Kathryn, but it's all downhill according to Spock.
Oh, wow.
But it turns out that's not true. And so neuroplasticity is really a fancy way of saying, look, the human brain is dynamic. It's constantly reorganizing, and it's malleable. And it can be shaped, and it's shaped by environmental input, and that's everything. And it can be something very negative. Okay, the brain can be shaped to be very negative. It can be shaped to be violent. It can be shaped to do bad things. But I like to talk about the good things, the positive things. It can be shaped for a lot of positivity and love and forgiveness and caring and compassion and health. And so we know that. So then if we know that, then the key is, what is it that can shape it for health? And that's what you and I are sort of wrestling with here today.
So can you reshape your brain?
Absolutely.
I'm 4 years old. Can I reshape my brain at this time?
Yes, absolutely. Because it goes back to the fact that the brain doesn't change in its basic principles. It wants to be stimulated. It wants to be healthy. It wants to do positive things. That's the natural DNA for us.
Right.
But it depends on what we do about it. Quick example. We know older adults who isolate and segregate have a higher risk of what? Dementia. Okay. With the pandemic now, we're learning about mental illness in alarming numbers for the youth as well. And what are we dealing with? Isolation and segregation. Okay. So that's just one quick example of how we get shaped by what we do and what is happening around us.
So in this pandemic, luckily we're starting to come out of it, and hopefully it will stay that way. I was watching something alarming about Brazil this morning, and hopefully we don't get that variant. But if something were to happen and we were to go back into lockdown, what could we do to keep our brain working at an optimum?
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. I mean, the pandemic has really hoisted upon us a number of chronic stressors, which is having a negative impact that we really have to pay attention to. But, you know, look at us here right now, Kathryn. Thank goodness we have technology, right? You and I
love it.
We're at an age where we didn't have the cell phone. We didn't have. I remember in college, I didn't have a computer. You know,
right?
And so that's one of the good things. And, you know, I know that one of your sponsors in senior living, I've done a lot of work with senior living, and they're real heroes. They've really done just so much that they could do to permit, you know, I have an older mom, 97, in senior living, and I remember standing outside the building with a cell phone so that my mom could see me.
Right.
Okay? That was permitted. And then as things thawed out, the senior living leaders permitted some other things to happen. And so they're trying so very hard. And it's that vulnerable population that maybe isn't able to use technology or doesn't know how to use technology that we have to be really careful about. But for us, technology is one of those ways. And then getting together as we're allowed with safety measures in place to really try to stay engaged. That's so important. We don't think of it as being important because it doesn't fit into the medical way of doing things, but just our ability to look each other in the eye, you know, is so very important, to be able to touch each other, to give a hug, and just to be able to be with one another is as health promoting as anything you're ever going to adjust medication wise.
I agree with you on that. I know when I mentioned to you when we were talking before that I had made a major move and moved many miles away from friends, family, all of that to be closer to my grandchildren. But I was missing a lot of my friends and things. Yeah. So one of my friends and I started doing, we used to go have coffee every week. And so we decided to start the coffee club again. And so I would send her a gift card to Starbucks, and one week, and the next week she'd send me one, and we would meet virtually. And of course, Starbucks was closed. We got to Starbucks and it's closed inside. So we sat outside in our cars. If the weather was nice, we sat outside and we had our cup of coffee and we chatted via Zoom, and it was great. Great. And I think that's one of the good things that's come out of this pandemic is it's forced people to learn something new.
Right.
And you were mentioning learning new things is a good thing for our brain, right?
Yeah, the two words I use in my writings are novelty and complexity. So things that are new and difficult tend to be uncomfortable for us at first. But the reason they're uncomfortable and the reason you can't do them is because you haven't laid any neural tracks to help you do them. So you have to have the neural tracks. You have to have the cellular connectivity to be able to knit, to be able to cook, to be able to speak, to do the professional things you're doing right now. So that takes some practice. So novelty and complexity is really, really important. I had an email from a 5th grader yesterday. This is one of the cool things about my work. And this student was doing a project and wanted to know if travel is good for our brains. And it turns out that travel is good for our brains for that precise reason. You plop your brain down into a new and therefore typically complex environment. You engage with a new culture. You may have to learn a new language. You indulge in a new cuisine. And it's recreational and stress relieving. And you tend to exercise a little bit more when you travel. So all those things have been found to really shape the brain for health. So travel is something that's good for the brain, we think.
Interesting. And of course, unfortunately, we haven't been able to travel much, but it is starting to open up and people are able to get out a little bit and do that.
Right.
And there's a lot of virtual travel channels that you can go on and tour museums and zoos and all kinds of things. It's really interesting. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
So are there any basic points about the human brain that everyone should know? You talked about some of the things about our brain. It's 3 pounds, and you were talking about the jungle inside. I love that. I love that. I'm going to remember that forever because it just gave me a great visual to see. And when you were talking about just a minute ago about being able to work with people and learn new things, I thought about, okay, I'm learning new things and I'm building my jungle. I'm growing the trees in my jungle so that it's thicker and harder for that weed whacker to get in there and whack at it.
Yeah, no, that's right. And, this is part of what I've enjoyed doing for the past 20 years is teaching the general public about the miracle that sits between their ears. I mean, think about it. It's probably the greatest paradox in the history of civilization. We have this miracle that really has all the answers to all of our questions. We're just fairly primitive. We haven't tapped into it. So my work really involves teaching the basics to everybody so you know what's under the hood and then what you can do to shape this beautiful part of you. But, your brain is the epicenter for your identity. It's your cognitive, your thinking system. Mm-hmm. We tend to give that too much weight, by the way, because you also have an emotional system, okay? And I teach people, I do a brain health moment here where I live every day to a yoga class several times a week. And I teach them, I get 1 minute, okay? And I teach them some of these basics. But if you think of your arm almost like a spinal cord coming up, the brain evolved this way, okay? And you can see the fist is kind of that rumple thing we all think about as our brain. And that's where we think cognitively. But underneath, Kathryn, underneath that is this beautiful emotional system that really fuels all of our thinking. Now think about it. Have you ever been a little bit upset? Maybe you didn't make a good decision? Or maybe has a decision really upset you? It has me. But one of the goals we should have for ourselves, regardless of age, is to balance the thinking part with the emotional part. And you do that through things such as deep breathing and meditation. And I'm a big believer and proponent of prayer and nature. And these kinds of things and a good walk can really help us get balanced because your brain wants balance, everyone. Your brain is no different than the universe. That's another metaphor I use. The universe has rhythms to it. Every night the stars come up. Every morning the sun comes up and then it goes down later in the day. The moon emerges and I'm near water. I can tell you that there's waves and these waves never stop. They just keep coming, Kathryn, and they're sort of in a rhythm. It's interesting. Your brain's the same way. It wants to be in rhythm. Now, we're really good, particularly in the United States, at getting ourselves out of rhythm. We do silly things to get ourselves out of rhythm, and then we feel kind of stressed, and then we don't sleep, and we get headaches, and we have stomach problems, and we get irritable. But we also are very loving, and we're also very kind. And when we're in rhythm, we think more clearly, we move more efficiently, we make better decisions, we relate better. And so really trying to identify what it is that can get you back to your rhythms and bring some balance. You have that ability, and it's because of neuroplasticity and the things that we do each and every day.
I love the idea that no matter what your age, you can change your brain. That's just beautiful to me. And I like you, I'm a huge believer in prayer and meditation and deep breathing. In fact, I used to teach it many years ago. I taught stress management to corporations and I taught them breathing techniques. I always used to say the breath is something everybody has. You don't have to have a special tool. You can take it anywhere you go and you can use it at any time and nobody even has to know what you're doing. And so it's beautiful. But it's remembering to do that. It's getting in the rhythm of doing that. And I think this whole pandemic thing kind of threw a lot of people off kilter. I know it did me. And I usually am pretty balanced. I pride myself on that because I've learned a lot of things over the years, but I fell off. I did. And then I went through this move and I fell even deeper off. And so luckily I knew a lot of these things. And so I started doing my daily walks, and that helped. And my husband and I started walking together, and that helped. And, you know, we just started finding ways to bring ourselves back into balance. And I think you are right. You hit the head on the nail there.
Yeah, and you know, the lifestyle I talk about really includes 5 pillars, and you're hitting on them. You know, there's physical activity, and why is that important? Because your brain needs 25% of the blood. So the daily walk, a swim, riding a bike, it doesn't have to be anything major, but you got to be dance, working in the yard. Mental stimulation is the second pillar, that really want to go after things that are new and challenging for yourself. You know, we tend to be rote and passive. We tend to be procedural animals. We don't like to think of ourselves that way. But most of us got up this morning. Most of us started with a cup of coffee. Most of us did A, B, C, and D. We got dressed. We weren't even conscious of the fact we got dressed, but we look pretty nice, you know, so we're obviously doing some things using our subconscious, and it's the same thing. So getting out of that a little bit is good. You know, socialization, very important. We've talked about spirituality, you know, the yoga, the meditation, the deep breathing, the nature, the prayer, and then obviously nutrition. What we eat, we've learned, is very, very important for our brain, and eating the right kinds of fats. So fish, you know, unsalted nuts, eating green leafy vegetables. The Mediterranean diet has been shown to be very effective at helping to shape the brain for health. The pandemic is a tough thing, Kathryn, because it's kind of an unfair fight, right? It was thrown at us. We didn't have any role in it. But, you know, it's caused us to get into an environment that's not enriched. It's not a blue zone. It's the anti-blue zone, okay? Blue zones are areas of the world where people live long lives because they're doing all the things you and I are talking about. But the pandemic made us isolate. It made us segregate. We have to wear masks. We're not able to get to the gym. We're not able to get to the church. We probably eat less healthy. I know the good Dr. Nussbaum put on a few COVID pounds. And because of stress, and because of we're in an environment, namely our home, where it's too easy to kind of go eat some of the goodies. But we're resilient as well, right? And we are coming through. And I've been asked to do a couple of in-person keynotes, Kathryn. I used to do that all across the world. I hadn't done that for a year and a half. But just the fact that I got an invitation to do that a couple of times has nothing to do with me. It tells me maybe we're beginning to thaw out a little bit. Maybe we're going to get back together. And you know what, Kathryn? One of the big questions I'm getting asked is, and think about this for a second, how do I act? That's an interesting question. How do I behave now that I'm coming back out? And it sounds silly, but it's not. You have to take a step back and say, oh my goodness, we have to rethink about how it is we can be ourselves again. And that can be a little bit challenging for a lot of us. So, you know, the good news is, ultimately, I think you framed it well. We have control over ourselves. No matter what goes on around us, as bad as it gets, we have control over how I'm going to think, how I'm going to identify myself as a person. You know, Kathryn, some of the healthiest people I've ever met have a terminal illness. Some of the most unbalanced people I've ever met, they've been in my office. They have every resource in the world. They're as healthy as can be, but they're miserable. And so that really is about what goes on between our ears. And that's what we have control over. And age does not matter. My goodness, your banner up there says life after 50. Life's just beginning, folks. What are you going to be? Who are you going to be? What are you going to do? You're here for a reason. Who are you going to help today? You know, how are you going to change the world and make it greater? That's our challenge.
You know, it's so interesting because I've met 85 and 90-year-olds that are vibrant and alive and doing all kinds of amazing things. And I've met 50-year-olds that literally, in their mind, it was time for them to retire and die. They were there, you know. I met a lady years ago that she had several heart attacks, and she was like 55, 56. And I said, wow, you're so young to have already had a couple of heart attacks. And she kind of puffed up really. And she said, well, I'll have you know I'm over 50. As if that gave her the right to have a heart attack, and she was supposed to. But in her family, everybody had died by age 60.
Mm.
And so she was on that track. And guess what? She did. She died, I think she was 61.
Right.
And it was sad because, it didn't have to be that way. I looked at her and I thought, it didn't have to be that way. It just didn't have to be that way. Right. So we do have control. And I love that we have control. So thank you for coming here and telling people that they do have some control and they can do some things. Right. So I want to make sure that people know how to get in touch with you.
Sure.
We have the Brain Health Center, and that's CTR. So it's abbreviated, brainhealthctr.com. And you can get all kinds of information. In fact, Dr. Nussbaum also has several books on there that you can order from him. Save Your Brain, 5 Things You Must Do to Keep Your Mind Young and Sharp, and What is the Purpose of My Brain? So he's got a couple of good books there that, let me see how I can get that back out. There we go. So that's great. He's got a lot of good information. He's got videos. You can reach out to him also. I believe you gave me a phone number if you want to reach out and talk to him. Would you prefer a phone call or text?
Either way.
Either way. Okay. All right. Great. Don't worry. Before we leave, is there anything that we missed? Is there anything else that you would like to talk about or say?
No, the one thing I would like to say is that within your brain, you have this wonderful, beautiful area. It's very, very old part of the brain. It's called your reward system, REWARD, reward system. And that's the area of the brain where joy gets sparked. You had mentioned your grandchild. Well, think about what it's like if you feel a baby's face next to yours or a puppy licking you. That thing that even your face right now is showing joy, Kathryn. It just sparks joy. And, at this time, we have a lot of angst in the country. I did a webinar the other day, and there was 400 people on it because the title was Anxiety in the Brain. And that's where we are today, okay? And my message to everybody is, look, we have the ability to be a very loving and caring and compassionate and empathetic and forgiving species. It's a beautiful thing we have. And it's the most potent, powerful medicine we have is love. And what I see going on now a lot, Kathryn, is angst and anger and name calling. And part of it is because the pandemic, right? I mean, we've been isolated, and part of it is messaging we get through social media and the newscasts that is very negative, and it's not who we are. So you afforded me the opportunity. That's the thing I would say. If this was my last day, this is the thing I would say to everybody. Use this miracle in wonderful ways and reach out to somebody in need. Forgive somebody today. We all have somebody we can forgive. Say you're sorry. It's a wonderful thing. And express love and kindness. That'll be good for your health. And it'll do wonder for everybody else. And if you want a planet where brain health emerges, that's the avenue. And there's no side effects.
The side effects are great.
They're great side effects.
You feel good.
So that's part of the practice of brain health as well. I call it neurospiritual healing, and that's we have that ability. So let's think about that anyway.
I love that. Thank you so much. This has been great. I really enjoyed having you on the show. Maybe we can do this again later. I think you've got a wealth of information that everybody needs to know, and we'll get this video out there. So if you're watching this, share it with your friends. Everybody needs this information. We want you to navigate the second half of your life with joy and happiness and enjoy that second half of your life. So I'm Kathryn Watson, and this has been the Life After 50 show. And I thank you for being here today and watching this show. And Dr. Nussbaum, thanks again.
Thanks, Kathryn. You're the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Life After 50 show, where we help you navigate the second half of your life. Join us on the second and fourth Wednesday of each month at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook or YouTube. And be sure to visit findhoustonseniorcare.com where you can find all the replays. Make sure